thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here talking about leadership and all the things that can help you be the best leader that you can be. So today we're going to be talking about growth, right? The pain of growth, the plateaus that happen in growth, which for a lot of people causes pain, right? It causes its own pain, and then progress, right? In the end, it's about progress, not perfection. You're not going to get there anyway, so why stress about it? Robert, any opening thoughts on this topic that we're going to be tackling today?
Yeah, as a young athlete in high school, I wish I knew then what I know now about plateaus and progress, because a lot of times we get really frustrated when we don't see that straight line of success. And we now know that success is not a straight line. I say that to my clients all the time. But when you're a youngster and you're struggling and you're practicing and you're wondering why your time in the 400 is not going down, it would have been helpful to know that the plateau is actually the place where you're making that growth. You just don't see it because it's happening on the inside. And so
Right.
if my coach would have said, hey, just hang in there and keep doing your reps, keep going out there and training hard, it's going to happen, it would have been a lot less frustrating.
Yeah. I can speak to that from personal experience. It's interesting. You know, the past weekend, I did an event. It's called Ragnar. It's a running event. We actually got really lucky that it was a one-day event rather than the normal two-day event. They have brought on a modified version that's called a sprint. And so instead of each runner running 3 legs and there being 12 runners, there are only 6 runners and you only run 2 legs. So it has its increased challenges even with the shorter version, because there's less recovery time before you run again. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but in the context of what we're talking about, right, pain, plateaus, and progress, the really interesting thing is all 6 people on my team, over the last 2.5 years, things have changed a little bit, right, with the way people have continued with or not their athletic endeavors, I'll put it that way. The way people have worked out or not worked out the way that they had before. Some people had. And a lot of times we use events, even if it's not an athletic, even in your life, if it's something else, there's an upcoming speech or there's a project that needs to get done, right? A lot of times we use these events as the sort of the catalyst to move us forward, to do something that requires us to make some strides towards improving a skill, whatever that skill is, right? And it could be something that is athletic. It could be something wholly different. So all of us, right, had not quite probably trained the way we would have liked. And these are not events that are meant to be simple. It's not a flat surface, just run from here to there and you're done. It is a continuous movement. So even when you're not running, you're still in motion. And it's a team event, right? So there was a lot of talk, and I won't get into the specific talks, but a lot of talk about all 3 parts of this. And I found myself continuously reminding my teammates that one, we were here doing it. right? And that the challenge of doing it, even if you are not exactly where you want to be, is part of the process, right? This is part of the process. And as you said, the growth is not linear, and that we're expecting to pick up where we left off, right? The last time we did something. So it, it's important. I think it's just important to walk away today with the idea that if you are going to grow, if you're going to learn and grow as a person, as a leader, to recognize that the most important thing is to just keep moving. And that's like the ultimate message in the Ragnar race is if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, eventually you get to your end goal, right? And each person getting to their end goal helps the team get to its end goal. And then when you get to the end, we were already talking about doing the next one because there is something that comes after that, because we're always looking to, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? There's that phrase, if you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not continuing to move, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so consistency was when you were sharing your opening thoughts. Consistency came to mind, and persistence, that we have to just be persistent. And again, it's one step in front of the other. And it is in those periods where you don't feel like something is happening, right? If you look at the transformation, the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly, right? From the outside, we don't get to see everything that's happening in there, right? Just walking by, you see a cocoon, you don't see, or an egg that is left to become a chicken or a duck or a bird, right? We don't get to see what's happening. An egg is laid. There's just an egg, or there's a cocoon, but all the change that needs to happen, and that change is painful change, right? That change is painful, and it looks like nothing is happening, and then because it continues, eventually you see progress. There's a butterfly, there's a chicken or a duck or whatever. And it's the same for us. And if we would stop expecting it to be wrapped up like a movie, right? That is going to be like some 2-hour movie or a 1 hour television episode of something.
Which is solved in the last 10 minutes, right?
Right. And so you see the drama, and then in the end, everything, it's not like that. And so expecting that, and that's the mindset piece of this, right? And this is the piece that I am working with my clients on constantly, is the mindset piece. Because when it comes to doing the work itself, that's the easy part, right? Doing the work itself. It's keeping your mind in the game so that you can and will continue to do the work when you don't see the change happening.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I'm glad you talked about the pain, because there's a fantastic book called Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Pohl. And it really talks about, it's really the science of peak performance. And what we're talking about when we say pain, we're talking about deliberate practice. And that is practicing something or working on something at the very edge of your comfort zone. That's when you're going to make that progress. We don't like the struggle, though. So we tend to avoid that. But if you're going to make that progress, it's working right at the edge of your comfort zone. Not so much that you get frustrated and you stop, but just beyond where you're comfortable. Here's the other thing. Improvements are unpredictable. because when you hit that plateau, like I mentioned earlier, that's when the stuff that's happening inside you, where your nerves are, you have, neuroplasticity is happening, your brain is rewiring itself. You can't see all of that stuff. And it takes time, especially when you're breaking an old habit. And I don't want to get too sciencey, but what ends up happening is, those neurons need to prune off, they need to cut off those other connections to form new connections. And that takes time. And that is why improvement takes so long. And but sometimes we get frustrated and we stop.
One of the things that I learned a few years ago from a coach that I was working with is that this concept of, it's called the DIF, duration, intensity, and frequency. And this is one of those things that you're talking about not being linear, right? This is not a straight line. Whatever it is you're doing, whatever it is you're working for, changing habits, moving from doing things one way to doing something a different way, or building a new habit altogether, is that in the piece, there's like, what do you mean it's not a straight line, right? There are fits and starts and fits and starts, I think is the way.
Yeah, I think
right? Stops and starts. And there are going to be seemingly this period of time where you feel like you've mastered whatever you're working towards, right? So I've mastered it. And then out of the clear blue sky one day, something happens that is the old you, the old habit, the prior life. And you're like, I thought I had addressed that. I thought I'd taken care of that, right? And the reality is, with all the neurons and breaking off and new neurons forming and charging up, it still doesn't go away. It's still a part of you. And if you're expecting that something that you thought you had mastered or taken care of won't ever pop up, I want you to look at it in a slightly different light. And it is this, the DIF, duration, intensity, frequency. So the duration, the more you're working on something, particularly if you're breaking a bad habit, first of all, if you're breaking a bad habit, just know you need to replace it with a new habit. If you don't fill that gap, you won't break it, right? So it comes in two parts. You got to replace that habit with something else. But even in replacing it, you may go a long period of time where you're like, oh, the bad habit is gone. And then out of nowhere, here it is again. And so what you're wanting is for the duration between the time you have that and the next time that bad habit, behavior, activity, thought, then it gets longer and longer, right? That's sort of the goal. If you can get it to be longer and longer, because in the beginning, you have to be very intentional with your thoughts. You have to be very present in what you're doing. And then at some point it starts to become the habit. The new thing becomes a habit, and it is on autopilot. But then something from the past jumps in, and here it is. So if it can be a longer and longer period of time between, let's call them episodes, you're doing great. And that's the progress, right? That's the progress piece of this. It's about progress, not perfection. The other thing is, if the intensity of whatever it is you're going through, feeling, is lessened, right? The intensity of how you're feeling about something. Let's say that the habit that you're breaking is, here's an easy one. I think we can all, that will all resonate with us. Road rage. Let's do that. If you are actively working to get rid of your road rage, right? And so instead of thinking and blurting out something at someone, right? You're driving and they cut you off, and instead of like yelling out idiot, I think I've shared that story before, right? You yell out idiot without rolling down the window, mind you, and without chasing them down. You're just in your car, right? So that you don't actually create problems with the other driver, but you're just driving and you yell out idiot. So let's say that happened on January 1st this year. And it used to be something that you did every single day, maybe multiple times a day, especially for if you live in New York like Robert, where the drivers are awful and the traffic is really bad.
Hey, that's a stereotype.
I watched it in a movie. Let's say, right? So you're doing it multiple times a day, and then you get to a point where you're doing it once a day, and then you're getting to the point where it's like once a week. And because in the beginning you're conscious of the fact that you're doing it, and so you're paying attention, then it becomes the new thing. You realize you don't need to do that, right? And maybe what you replace it with is you take a quick, a breath, you take a deep breath, and you say, I'm letting it go, right? And that becomes your new habit. It's like, I'm letting it go. It doesn't matter, whatever you replace it with, it doesn't matter. And then you look up 4 months later and somebody does something and you do it again. And you're like, I thought I'd taken care of this. It's okay. It's okay, right? It had been months since you've done it again. Now it's on your mind again. And what you can view it as is just an opportunity to go back in and reinforce it with intentionality and being present, because the new habit now is starting to cement, right? It's starting to ingrain, and you're really not thinking about it anymore. So what that incident does, it just reminds you to stay present. The intensity piece of that. So that's duration. The intensity piece, maybe before you started this new habit, you would get really angry, right? And frustrated, and you would yell out, and then you talk about it and you tell your friends, somebody cut you off, and you're all worked up for hours and hours. Now you've whittled it down to, maybe it's a minute, maybe it's 30 seconds, right? The intensity is just not there anymore. And then frequency is how often this thing is happening, right? So you want the duration. I had that backwards. The frequency is how frequently it's happening. The duration is how long it lasts. And the intensity is the depth to which you are feeling whatever you're feeling. And all three of those things, right, are an indication. They can help you be more objective with the measurement of how things are going. So just keep that in mind. Duration, intensity, frequency, as you are making changes, letting that help you see how you are progressing, because you can actually measure what's happening. And if you combine that with keeping a journal or a log or something as you are moving through the change. And these are things that I have my clients work. It's like, keep track of these things because we get in our head that in the plateau, nothing's happening, right? But if you continue to keep track of what you're doing, persistent, consistent, one day, I think when we were talking about doing this, having this discussion, you talked about the breakthrough, right? And it is the breakthrough on the other end. And a lot of times you won't notice that you've broken through until you see it in the rear view mirror.
Or the breakthrough catches you by surprise. We've all seen athletes that, one game They're having they're a regular athlete. They're, probably pretty good because to be at that elite stage, you got to be the 1%, right? The 1% of the 1%, or whatever that is. But all of a sudden, they have a game that is spectacular. And you can see the look on their face. They're like, I don't know how I did it. It's coming out of nowhere. Well, there's a reason for that. And I want to just touch back on something that you said. Mastery is not perfection.
Yeah.
We sometimes are looking for perfection when we should be looking for mastery. Mastery, in order to get what we're all looking for, is flow, right? We hear flow. You want to be in that state of flow. Well, flow doesn't happen until you can do whatever task it is, whether it's run a meeting, whether it's deliver a performance appraisal, whether it's deliver corrective action, whether it's teaching your employees or coaching your employees. That doesn't happen until you can do the task without thinking too much. If you have to consciously go back and go, okay, what's step 1? What's step 2? What's step 3? And so on, you're not going to be in flow. Flow happens when you've put enough deliberate practice in, working at the edge of your comfort zone, so you can now go back to that task, whatever that task is, and not think about it too much, so that your body, your unconscious awareness can just take over, and that is when you achieve flow. So if you are avoiding something that you don't like to do and you really want to be better at it, you probably should stop avoiding it and put the work in so that it can become more, for lack of a better word, unconscious.
There's a balance in that. And here's the thing about habits and the things that we're doing is that there is this point where that you called it unconscious awareness, right? That you're so good, you've done it so many times that it's like second nature to you. And you want that mastery. You want to be in that flow. At the same time, and I like that you combine the two, unconscious awareness, because you still have to be aware in terms of in the present moment, that you can recognize that you are in flow. And I think people say that, people will say that I was in the flow, right? Athletes say it all the time. The ball was like this. I was feeling it. I was rolling with it. You can be in the moment and still let it take over, because you've been that muscle memory, right? And in your brain's a muscle. So it's muscle memory, whether it's from your brain or your heart or wherever it's coming from, the actual physical activity. That's okay. And just be willing to be in the moment while you are flowing, right? And the way I have heard it described is like, instead of trying to count clouds as they go by, right? You just notice, right? You just take notice, and then you let it go. Take notice and let it go. And that way you can be exactly what you said, consciously aware. But you don't want to ever be in such a habit state that it is not, that you're not there, that you're not fully present. And here's the reason why. You're talking about a couple of things, performance evaluations or conversations that you're having with your team, with your team. If you are not there, fully there and present, it's impossible for you to be an active listener, right? And let's call it a conscious contributor, right? Your job is to be there, and you don't want to be on such autopilot that you're not hearing people, that you are not paying attention to them and you are not contributing or having to ask multiple times, what did you just say? Right? Because you're not there, because the habit part has taken over. So just a little balance in that is what I wanted to call attention to.
Absolutely. It's case in point, what we're doing right now. This is unrehearsed. We don't rehearse these conversations. We may pick a topic and we may do research. We do research separately. We don't compare notes. I need to be able to connect with you. And that means that I have to be present, paying attention to what you're saying in order to contribute to what's going on. So there is a connection component of that. And that's why it's conscious awareness and unconscious awareness. You have to be able to do the thing that you're engaging in a way that's easy for you, but you also have to notice what's happening. I don't notice your facial expressions. I don't notice the words that you're using. If I don't notice that you're connecting something that I said previously, I'm going to come back with something that's completely unrelated, and it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So it's that connection that I think some people miss. The thing that came up for me while we're talking about this, because I know we both like tennis, and Serena Williams is said to retire at the end of this.
Evolve.
Yes, right. Yes, she's going to evolve at the end of the U.S. Open. Here's somebody, arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, female tennis players of all time, right? Or tennis players of all time. Let's just put it that way. Has a tremendous serve. If she were perfect, she'd never miss a serve.
Right.
But she does. And so I think that's the thing that we forget, no matter how good you are. And we're talking about somebody who is at the elite, the highest level of a very difficult sport. She still misses serves. And that's something that we need to think about as we are going through whatever leadership exercise we're doing, whether it's, and I wanted to connect this to something that you had mentioned, that we had mentioned before, having difficult conversations with people. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that a lot of leaders dread, a lot of leaders avoid. If you want to be better at it, practice it, study it, stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone. So when it happens, you can have that unconscious awareness. You can be in flow. You can connect with that person and you can be empathetic, and you can still have that conversation in a way where they leave feeling like they were heard and you got your message across. If you don't practice it, they're going to be upset. Probably you're going to be upset. Most likely it's not going to achieve what you set out to do, and you're probably going to avoid it nearly every time it needs to be done. So it's one of those things. And so it is that balancing act. We're looking at that thing that you really need to work at and deciding where is your comfort level and moving the needle a little bit so that you can stretch and grow and it can be easier for yourself.
Not to keep tying this back to athletic endeavors, but as you were mentioning Serena Williams and her serve, it just made me think of athletes that I've seen in general, from kids on up, right? Being upset about something that hasn't, striking out or missing a serve. Runners, right? Not running as quickly as they would like to. And sort of the anger piece that comes along with that, it helps most. I will say those who aspire to really be better, those moments inspire them to dig in, right? To practice more. And it's not just practice, it's practicing correctly. It's practicing a particular way for the thing that you're doing, right? I used to hear it's practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect, or something like that, right? Which is still a little weird because there's no perfection. But if you're not practicing the right thing, all the practice in the world isn't going to make you better. So you have to pay attention to what it is you are practicing, right? Which goes back to, what are you thinking? Right, in the context that when you move this out of athletics and you move this into what you are doing as a leader, which is relating to your people, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you practicing? Where are you practicing it? And who are you practicing it with? Right? You probably are not practicing are looking to practice, let's say, difficult conversations with the people that you need to have difficult conversations with, right? You want to practice that. And if you're practicing it with those people, which in the end, you've got to have the having the actual difficult conversation in and of itself is the practice. Right? Robert may have a conversation that he needs to have with one of his clients or with someone else. He and I could practice that conversation that can help him think through what he wants to say. But in the end, it's not a difficult conversation between Robert and I. Right? The conversation has to happen. So he can plan to have all the things, and I can pretend to have all the responses that the recipient of his conversation, I can pretend to have all the reactions that person might have. It's still not the same, right? And so in the end, you've got to, as Robert said, get out of your comfort zone. Or do it in spite of being in your comfort zone, maybe is a better way of looking at it. And knowing that is practice as well. So we can do the dance. He can practice saying, I can say, yeah, you probably don't want to say that, or you don't want to say it that way. And I could pretend that, be hard and unresponsive or not accepting what he has to say or any of that. It's not going to be the exact same as that conversation. So just know that. So you can practice it, but those conversations themselves are where it's tested. The athletic endeavor itself, as much as Serena has probably hit thousands, millions of serves, right? Until she's doing it under the pressure of, right? I used to hit buckets and buckets of serves. Buckets and buckets, right? And then I would go to competition, play in a tournament, and there are people around watching, and there's an opponent on the other side. And this match matters more than the practice matches, right? And then in my head, I've got all the stuff in my head, and then the ball doesn't land in the service box, right? And we have that. So yes, you have to practice. You have to think through. You have to, do a workflow for doing evaluations and all of that, giving forethought, what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, what you're going to do, how you're going to interact with people. You have to do all that, but recognize that when you actually get in the game, when you're actually there with your people, right, that it may not go the way you had it planned in your head, but the fact that you planned and prepared makes it go more easily. And you have to remind yourself that it's part of the process. And moving through the process, moving through the pain of practice, deliberate practice, moving through the pain of that, right? Recognizing that there are going to be periods of time when you have no clue whether or not you've grown or gotten better. And you're not going to know until you are there at the particular time doing the thing in reality that you're going to know whether or not you've made the progress that you've been preparing for. And then if you didn't, it's okay, right? That would be the thing I would like to leave you with today. That it's okay, because it's not linear. And as long as you continue to be persistent and consistent with your efforts to continue to get better, it's going to happen. And you'll look up one day and you'll sit for a performance evaluation and it'll just flow. It'll be good, right? Or you'll lead a project. You'll be the project manager on some project, leading a team on, if you don't have a permanent team, leading a team on a project or something, and it'll just flow. And you'll be like, I did that, right? And that feeling of the breakthrough. So just hang in there is I'll call that my final word on this.
Okay.
How about you?
I love a lot of what you said, all of what you said, not a lot, all of it. I think one of the things that I do when I work with my clients is look at it this way. When you practice like try to create as much of the performance environment as you can so it's as real as possible. So I separate it. You have practice and you have performance. The performance is the real event. So certainly practice helps. You need to practice, but it needs to be that right kind of practice. It needs to be, like you said, react the way that person's going to react. That person, you give that person that you're working with the script. They're going to say this and they're going to react this way. Try to make it as real as possible so that when you're performing, when the event is actually happening, you've dealt with all of that. That is how you deliberately practice. It needs to be very much like the actual performance. Not so much if you're terrible at it, not so much that you're falling apart. Do it incrementally. So you're conquering one challenge after another so you can get through the whole thing without too much of a stress. And I think that is the way to go about it. And I think that's going to be my final word.
Well, cool. Practice and performance. Make your practice as close to performance as possible. Recognize that, all of this, it takes work. It's not going to be a straight shot. And if you can keep the diff in mind, right? The duration, intensity, and frequency. Mindset, it's not linear. It's not going to be wrapped up in a 2-hour movie in a nice, tidy bow. You'll be fine, right? And just keep one step after the other. And next thing you know, you are where you're going. You have the mastery and the flow that you've been seeking. So with that, we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. If you've had experience with this, right? Or to share how you've experienced this, moving through the pain of the deliberate practice, the plateaus, right? What are you thinking in those plateaus? And then the progress side of things. We would love to hear from you. And if there's anything that we can do to be of further service to you, please feel free to reach out. You can send a direct message or email Robert or I here in LinkedIn, or if you're watching this on Facebook through the Facebook Messenger or on YouTube. We thank you. Appreciate you liking, subscribing, and checking us out every Thursday. I don't think I said that at the beginning this week. Every Thursday, we are with you every Thursday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, talking all things leadership. And so until next time, thank you for joining us for the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. Take care.
Bye now.